Hello everyone, welcome to Daily Storyteller, and today I'm here to help you sleep. So before we begin, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're from and what time you're watching. Lay back comfortably, relax, and let's begin. Part 1. The year was 2019. In the serene mountains of Catskills, New York, Claire Morgan drove her car up a winding dirt road. The trees, stripped bare by winter, stood like skeletal sentinels. Claire wasn't afraid of the isolation. In fact, she welcomed it. At 28, Claire was at a crossroads in her life. A messy breakup and months of burnout at work had left her craving solitude. She had booked the cabin on a whim after seeing its listing online. The pictures had promised peace, a small cozy retreat with a stone fireplace, wooden floors, and views of the snowy forest. When she arrived, the cabin was just as advertised, if not more isolated. It stood alone, surrounded by endless trees. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, no distractions. "This is perfect," Claire muttered as she unloaded her bags. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar and old books. A single window by the fireplace framed a picturesque view of the forest, but something about the stillness outside felt too quiet. She shook off the thought and lit the fireplace. Claire was here to heal, to think, to be alone. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the shadows outside grew longer. That first night, Claire sat by the fire, sipping tea and reading a book. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional crackle of burning wood. Around 11 p.m., she heard it, a faint tap, tap, tap. She froze, straining to listen. The sound came from the window. Claire turned slowly, her heart pounding. Outside, the darkness pressed against the glass. She saw nothing. Just a branch, she told herself. But when she stepped closer, she noticed something odd. There were no branches near the window. Shaking her head, she locked the door and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The silence was suffocating, and she kept imagining she heard faint footsteps crunching in the snow outside. The next morning, Claire brushed it off as her nerves. She spent the day hiking and photographing the snowy landscape. By the time she returned, she felt calmer. The daylight had a way of making her fears seem ridiculous. That night, however, the tapping returned. This time, it was louder, more insistent. Claire's stomach knotted as she grabbed her phone. She turned on the flashlight and aimed it at the window. Still nothing. She tried to go back to reading, but every so often she thought she saw movement in her peripheral vision. A shadow, a flicker of motion near the edge of the trees. On the third day, Claire woke to find something strange. In the snow outside the cabin were footprints, large, deep prints leading from the forest to her window. Her throat tightened. She hadn't left the cabin since returning from her hike the day before. She examined the prints, which stopped abruptly about 10 feet from her window. There were no prints leading away. "Okay, this is insane," Claire muttered, retreating back inside. She locked every door and window, then dragged a chair in front of the door for good measure. But as the day wore on, her paranoia grew. Around noon, she spotted something carved into the frost on her window, a small symbol that looked like an eye. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. Had it been there before? She wasn't sure. By evening, the unease had morphed into dread. She decided to check her phone, but there was no service. The landline in the cabin worked, but who would she call? The police? And tell them what? That footprints appeared in the snow? She stayed up late, unable to sleep. Around 2 a.m., she heard the tapping again. This time, it wasn't coming from the window. It was at the door. Claire froze. The tapping was soft, deliberate. Someone or something was out there. Gripping a fire poker, she approached the door. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. No answer. The tapping stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, from the corner of her eye, Claire saw movement at the window. A face, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes staring directly at her. She screamed, stumbling backward. When she looked again, the face was gone. "Okay, I'm leaving," she whispered, her breath shaky. Claire grabbed her keys and bolted for the door. But as she opened it, she froze. Outside, the forest was still, but the footprints had returned. This time, they surrounded the cabin. Heart racing, Claire ran to her car. The engine sputtered, refusing to start. She pounded the steering wheel, panic rising. In the rearview mirror, she saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the trees. It wasn't moving, but she could feel its gaze. By morning, Claire was gone. The cabin owner, a retired man named Tom, arrived a week later to clean. Inside, he found Claire's belongings scattered. Her phone, wallet, and car keys were still there. But Claire was nowhere to be found. The only clue was a message scrawled in frost on the window. "You'll never be alone." To this day, Claire's disappearance remains a mystery. Some say she lost her mind. Others believe she encountered something in the forest that doesn't let its visitors leave. Whatever the truth, the cabin still stands, waiting for its next guest. And that's the story of the stranger watching through the cabin window. If you enjoyed this tale, please like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Let me know in the comments. Would you spend a night in a cabin like this? Part 2. It was 2022, a chilly November night. Blackstone Warehouse loomed large in the industrial district of town, its old brick walls weathered by time. The building stretched endlessly, its massive corridors filled with shelves that reached the ceiling. David Carter, 26, pulled into the parking lot. He was new, just 3 weeks into his job as a night shift worker. He didn't mind the hours. It was quiet, and the pay wasn't bad. Inside, the warehouse buzzed with fluorescent lights. The few other workers nodded at him as he clocked in. Marcus, an older man who had been there for years, leaned against a stack of pallets, sipping coffee. "First time on the midnight shift?" Marcus asked, smirking. David nodded. "Yeah, any tips?" Marcus chuckled. "Don't go to the back of the warehouse. That place, it's not right." David raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" Marcus shrugged, his face suddenly serious. "Just don't. Keep to your section and you'll be fine." David laughed nervously. He assumed Marcus was trying to mess with him. But as the night wore on, he couldn't shake the man's words. The first few hours were uneventful. David was tasked with organizing boxes in Section C. The silence of the warehouse was heavy, broken only by the hum of machinery and the occasional beep of a forklift. Around midnight, David heard it, a faint thud. He paused, straining to listen. Another thud, followed by what sounded like footsteps. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing through the empty aisles. No response. He shrugged it off and returned to work, but the unease lingered. An hour later, he passed by the security office. Inside, Marcus sat in front of a wall of CCTV screens. David peered in. "What are you looking at?" he asked. Marcus didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on one of the monitors. "I thought I saw—" "Never mind," he muttered, waving David away. Curious, David glanced at the screen. It showed the back of the warehouse, where the shelves ended and darkness seemed to stretch infinitely. For a moment, he thought he saw something move, a shadow darting between the shelves. "Must have been a rat," Marcus said, though his tone wasn't convincing. By 2 a.m., David's nerves were frayed. Every sound felt amplified in the stillness. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following him. As he stacked boxes, he noticed something strange. A trail of dust on the floor was disturbed, as if someone had dragged a heavy object through the aisle. The trail led toward the back of the warehouse. Against his better judgment, David followed it. The air grew colder as he ventured deeper into the building. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows. At the end of the aisle, he found a small locked door. It was metal, rusted, and looked out of place among the modern shelves. Beside it, the words "Do not enter" were scrawled in red paint. David reached out, but before he could touch the handle, a voice called out, "David!" He spun around. Marcus was standing a few feet away, his face pale. "What are you doing back here?" "There's something back there," David stammered. Marcus grabbed his arm. "You don't want to know. Just come on." Marcus didn't explain further, and David didn't press him. But as the hours dragged on, the curiosity gnawed at him. What was behind that door? At 4 a.m., David couldn't resist. While Marcus was busy in the security office, he returned to the back of the warehouse. The door was still there, its presence almost menacing. This time, it wasn't locked. David hesitated, then pushed it open. The room beyond was pitch black. He flicked on his flashlight, revealing a scene that made his blood run cold. The walls were covered in scratches, deep grooves that looked like claw marks. The floor was littered with broken boxes and what appeared to be old clothing, and in the center of the room stood a figure. It was human-like but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its eyes too wide. It stood motionless, its gaze fixed on David. David's breath caught. He stumbled backward, dropping his flashlight. The room plunged into darkness. A guttural growl filled the air, followed by the sound of something moving, fast. David ran. He didn't stop until he reached the security office. When David burst into the office, Marcus was gone. The CCTV monitors flickered, showing static. "Marcus?" David called out, his voice shaky. No answer. He turned to the screens, his eyes scanning for any sign of his coworker. Then he saw it. On one of the monitors, the figure was there. It stood in the center of the warehouse, staring directly at the camera. Behind it, Marcus lay motionless on the floor. David grabbed his phone, but there was no signal. The landline in the office was dead. Panic set in. He bolted for the exit, weaving through the endless aisles. As he reached the main doors, he glanced back. The figure was there, standing at the far end of the aisle, watching. David didn't stop running until he was outside, gasping for air. The warehouse loomed behind him, silent and dark. He never went back. Weeks later, the company announced that Blackstone Warehouse was permanently closed. No explanation was given. David tried to move on, but the memories haunted him. Late at night, he sometimes thought he could still hear the growl, low and guttural, echoing in his mind. And that's the story of the night shift at Blackstone Warehouse. If you enjoyed this tale, please like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Let me know in the comments. Would you dare work the night shift here? Thank you for watching, and sweet dreams. Part 3. It was 2015 mid-October when Liam O'Connor first set foot in the Hoia Baciu forest in Romania. Known as one of the most mysterious forests in the world, it had long been a fascination for adventurers and paranormal enthusiasts. Liam wasn't one of them. A 32-year-old wildlife photographer from Ireland, he was here for the vibrant autumn foliage and the promise of solitude. The stories about strange lights, whispers in the dark, and unexplained disappearances were nothing but folklore to him. The forest was beautiful, with golden leaves carpeting the ground and trees whose twisted branches seemed to reach for the sky. Liam set up camp near a small clearing where a circular patch of barren earth interrupted the lush greenery. Locals called it the dead zone, claiming nothing grew there. "This will make a great shot," Liam muttered to himself, adjusting his camera. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Liam noticed how eerily silent it had become. No birds chirped, no wind rustled the leaves, only his own footsteps broke the quiet. He shook off the unease and focused on his work. But as night fell, the forest seemed to close in around him. That first night, Liam sat by his campfire, reviewing the day's photos. The flames flickered, casting dancing shadows on the trees. Suddenly, a soft snap broke the silence. Liam looked up, his heart skipping a beat. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing faintly. No answer. He shrugged, attributing the sound to a deer or maybe a fox. But as he turned back to his camera, he noticed something strange. In one of his photos of the clearing, there was a faint glowing mist he hadn't seen earlier. "That's odd," he muttered, zooming in on the image. The mist seemed almost human-shaped. Shaking his head, Liam decided to call it a night. As he zipped up his tent, he thought he heard a faint whisper, like someone calling his name. "Just the wind," he told himself, but sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, Liam ventured deeper into the forest, drawn by an inexplicable urge. He followed a narrow, overgrown trail, stepping over roots and ducking under low-hanging branches. About an hour in, he found something peculiar, a massive tree with strange carvings on its trunk. The symbols were intricate, resembling spirals and eyes. They looked ancient. As he examined the carvings, he felt a sudden chill, despite the warm sun filtering through the canopy. The air seemed heavier, charged with an unseen energy. Liam took a few photos and moved on, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every so often, he thought he saw movement in the corner of his eye, a flicker of shadow darting between the trees. By late afternoon, he stumbled upon an even stranger sight, a stone altar covered in moss and vines. Around it, the ground was littered with old decaying bones, animal bones, he assumed. At least he hoped so. As he raised his camera to capture the scene, he heard it again, a whisper. "Liam." He froze. The voice was soft, almost gentle but unmistakable. Slowly he turned, his heart pounding. No one was there. As dusk fell, Liam decided to head back to his camp, but the forest seemed different. The trail he had followed was gone, replaced by dense undergrowth. Panic set in as he realized he was lost. The trees, once beautiful, now seemed menacing, their twisted forms like skeletal hands reaching for him. The whispers returned, louder this time, coming from all directions. "Liam, over here." He spun around, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Shadows danced between the trees, too quick and fluid to be human. Then he saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, its form barely distinguishable. It was tall and thin, with glowing eyes that pierced through the darkness. Its limbs seemed to move unnaturally, as if it were part of the forest itself. Liam stumbled backward, tripping over a root. The figure didn't move closer, but the whispers grew deafening, echoing in his mind. "Leave. Now." Gathering his courage, Liam turned and ran. He didn't stop until he reached the barren clearing where his camp had been. But the camp was gone. His tent, his gear, everything had vanished. Desperate, Liam ran until he broke through the tree line and collapsed onto a dirt road. a passing driver stopped and helped him to the nearest village. When he told the locals what he had seen, their faces paled. An old man shook his head. "The forest doesn't let everyone leave," he said. "You're lucky to be alive." Liam tried to move on, but the experience haunted him. He developed a paranoia he couldn't shake, constantly feeling watched. Months later, while reviewing his photos, he found one he didn't remember taking. It showed the stone altar, but this time a figure stood beside it, staring directly at the camera. Liam swore he could see a faint, knowing smile on its face. And that's the story of the forest that hides secrets. If you enjoyed this tale, please like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Let me know in the comments. Would you dare step into a place like this? Thank you for watching, and sweet dreams.